We're going to focus on making decisions and problem-solving techniques, and this will relate to the discussion board posting that you'll have due next week. So looking at today, the goal is to be able to outline a framework for decision making, discuss how critical thinking can be applied to the problem-solving process, and apply critical thinking to everyday problems. Overall, if we're formatting it into this power sort of scenario that we talk about throughout each week, in the preparation stage, we have to consider that decision making is the process of deciding among various alternatives. So looking at all the options that are available to you. The goal with preparation for decision making is to identify your goals. So every decision needs to start with your short and long-term goals in mind. Then we're going to move on to organize that data. So in the organization phase, we're going to consider and assess your alternatives. So you would want to develop a list of flexible alternatives and just use free writing techniques. So what that means is you've got the idea in mind that this is your ultimate goal. Let's say it is getting into vet school. Some people would like to get into vet school. So having that as your ultimate goal, it's good to have an idea about adequate alternatives. So if you don't get into vet school, let's say, and you apply this year, what are some alternatives? Could you take other courses? Could you carry on working in a vet clinic? Could you gain experience elsewhere? Could you reevaluate that whether or not vet school is right for you? So looking at the alternatives and just generally creating a list. A lot of times these alternatives and this alternative list can actually keep you pretty motivated, and it can open up windows and opportunities to yourself. Assess your alternatives, determine the possible outcomes of each. So what does that mean if I decide to take a different course while I'm trying to get into vet school? What does that mean? What would the outcome be if I were to work in the vet clinic for an extra year while I'm waiting to get into vet school? Maybe that means additional finances. That might be kind of nice. Determine the probability that those outcomes will take place. So think about how realistic it is that those outcomes could actually happen. And then compare the alternatives, taking into account the potential outcomes of each. And then you're going to create a list of pros and cons. So here, the example is the pros and cons of getting a tattoo. The pros, it expresses my individuality. It would represent something special to me. My friends all have one. It's the style these days to have a tattoo. I think they can be really pretty. My style icon, Lady Gaga, has several. Cons, my parents would be angry. It's expensive to remove. I don't like needles or pain. There's a risk of infection. Will it still look good when I'm 60? And it might not look good if I'm in a wedding dress or business attire. So this is a general list of pros and cons, and this is a hugely valuable tool to help you work through the decision-making process. Then we get down to the work phase, and that involves making and carrying out the decision itself. Choosing among the alternatives, give the decision time, make a mental movie, acting out the various alternatives, toss a coin, ask for advice, and go with your gut feeling. The final step of decision making is to carry it out. So just embrace that decision and commit to it. When you're making career decisions, some people create overall lists of different careers that they could take, and then looking at things like life satisfaction considerations. They might look at external research to help sort of direct them into the area that they want to fulfill or they want to be in. So it's something to think about. If it's a career-based decision, certainly do your research prior to committing to that career. If it's a specific job at one clinic that you've been offered, or if you have job opportunities from more than one clinic, it's good to do a little bit of research and find out what it is that you desire from your career, and will that particular clinic fulfill that for you. And then you're going to evaluate your decision. So consider the outcomes. Did you make the right decision? Consider the results, reevaluate, and consider alternatives if you find that you're not happy with your initial decision. So let's say you took that job from the vet clinic because it's close to your house. So you weighed this on the pros and cons list. It's close to your house. They seemed nice when they called. They seemed nice in the interview, and the pay was okay. You took it over the other job, and then now you're realizing that the other job had more progressive technology. They had a better system for filing. They had more worker-friendly options, things like that. So once you're settled into a decision that you've made, don't be scared to change your mind. Change is never a bad thing, in my humble opinion. Change can bring really positive things into your life. So don't be scared if you made the wrong decision, and don't be scared to change your mind and approach the other decision outcomes. And then you're going to rethink your decisions. So reconsidering your goals and options, there's no single decision that is best. There are often many routes to the same goal. Ask yourself, are my decisions still producing the desired consequences? Are my decisions still appropriate? Are they consistent with what I want to get out of life? So rethinking and reconsidering a lot of these components of your decision will help you stay grounded in your position, whichever decision you went with, and it can help you maintain focus of what you desire out of your original decision-making process. Looking at problem solving, overall it's the process of generating alternatives while working on a problem. So it's problem solving during the process of generating alternatives while working on a problem. So what is the problem that's happening here? What are the initial facts? What is it that you need to solve? What's the most critical aspect of the problem to be solved? And what can be ignored? So if you're trying to think about the different alternatives to this decision, you need to break it down a little bit. If you're stumped on what the potential alternatives could be, then you need to look at each of these points. So what are the initial facts? Why am I looking to change careers? Maybe that's it. What is it that you need to solve? Well, I need to make more money, or maybe I need to be in a workplace that respects me and shows me a mutual level of respect and appreciation. What's the most critical aspect of the problem to be solved? In the end, I want to have a career where I genuinely feel happy to go to work and fulfilled. And then what can be ignored? Well, I know that I'm willing to commute for work, so maybe if the commute is within 45 minutes, then I'm comfortable with that. So breaking it apart into tiny little pieces to help you come up with those potential alternatives while working on a problem can be very beneficial. Strategies for this: breaking down that problem into smaller bits, like we just talked about, working backwards, so starting at the end result of what you envision and thinking about a backward plan that would get you there. So I know that in the end, I want to be in a workplace where I have a supportive team, I have flexible hours, I get paid what I want to get paid, and I want to commute within 45 minutes. Once you have that in mind, then start thinking backward on how to approach that scenario. Use a chart or a graph to redefine the problem. So using more of a visual method, consider the opposite. So what would the opposite be to what is ideal? Use analogies, so comparisons. Take a different perspective when possible, so play devil's advocate when you're working through a problem, and try to forget about it for a while. Take a break, go out for a walk, go to sleep, wake up, reconsider it the next day. If it's a big decision that you have to make, especially if it's in regard to your career, such as accepting a job or looking at moving in order to acquire a job, then definitely taking time and sleeping on it, at least as bare minimum, is completely acceptable. And then assess your potential solutions. Is there a way to refine the solution? Are there appropriate or alternative approaches? And just remember that while you're going through this, if you can't come up with a solution that's going to give you a 100% satisfactory answer, there is no perfect solution. So it's more balancing what you're willing to compromise and what you're not willing to compromise in the end game. Problems in critical thinking, so things that kind of stump us up as we're trying to work through problems and solve dilemmas that we find ourselves in. Don't assume that labeling something explains the problem. Just by saying, oh, it's going to be the hardest decision of my life. So by saying, it's anecdotal, people always say, oh, making your decision about your schooling or making your decision about your career, oh, that's the hardest decision you'll ever make in your life. Just because you put a label to it doesn't mean that it explains the problem. Being able to break it down and explain why that's the hardest decision you'll ever make can help you work through why it's so important to you and what the potential alternatives are. Don't accept vague generalities. Don't confuse opinion with fact. So again, doing your research, making sure you're well versed in the information regarding that decision and the alternatives. Avoid jumping to conclusions. Be skeptical of, quote, common sense. Oh, everybody knows that clinic is awful. Oh, everybody knows that doctor is old school. Not a lot of that is fact. Sometimes it could be fact, but you need to do your research in order to find that out. And don't assume that one event causes another just because they occur one after the other. So keeping that in mind, if something happens, let's say you did poorly on your last interview and you're going into the next interview, ensuring that you're not telling yourself that, oh, I did so crappy on my last interview, this one's going to go poorly too, and I won't get this job offer. This job won't even be an opportunity to me. So don't let yourself have that cyclical way of thinking. One event does not always predict the next event. So thinking about a summary to this, things to think about as you work through the decision-making process. How can I improve the quality of my decisions? What strategies can I use for problem solving? What are some problems that affect critical thinking and how can I avoid them? So when you go into your discussion board for this week, you're going to look at the decision-making process and considering some things that could stump you up along the way and methods to help you work through your decisions.